HOA called Fire Marshal. He shut down their HOA office. You won't believe what happened when the Fire Marshal showed up at this HOA office. What started as a normal day quickly turned into a scene of shock, anger, and disbelief. Residents who had been battling with their HOA for months finally saw something happen that they never expected. And the way it all unfolded felt like a story right out of a movie. The tension had been building for months. People in the neighborhood had been whispering about strange things happening inside the HOA office. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Questions were ignored. Residents were left frustrated, with no answers and no transparency. But the biggest concern wasn't just about rules or fines. It was about safety. And safety is something you can't ignore, no matter how powerful you think you are. It all started with small signs that something wasn't right. A neighbor noticed exposed wires hanging dangerously near the HOA's meeting room. Another resident complained about smoke detectors that had been disabled. People kept talking, but nobody in the HOA office seemed to listen. Every complaint was brushed off. Every warning was pushed aside. The board acted like they were untouchable. But the truth was, their arrogance was about to cost them everything. Imagine walking into a building that claims to represent your community, only to realize it's a ticking time bomb. That was the HOA office. Stacks of old papers pile high like kindling, outdated electrical systems that sparked during storms, no proper fire exits marked, and worst of all, a total lack of accountability. Residents begged them to fix it, but the board just smiled and said, "We'll take care of it later." Later never came. One brave resident had enough. She decided to call the fire marshal. Her voice trembled when she made the call, but her heart was steady. She knew she was doing the right thing, because this wasn't just about frustration anymore. This was about protecting lives. She didn't care if the HOA board labeled her a troublemaker. She didn't care if she faced retaliation. She wanted the truth exposed, no matter the cost. When the fire marshal arrived, nobody expected the storm that was about to break. The board members sat in their chairs, smug and dismissive. They thought they could charm their way out of anything. But the fire marshal wasn't there for charm. He was there for facts, for evidence, and for safety. And the moment he walked through those doors, the atmosphere changed. Silence fell across the room like a heavy blanket. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His clipboard and sharp eyes did all the talking. Every corner he inspected revealed another violation. Missing extinguishers, blocked exits, unsafe wiring, piles of paper near heaters. Each discovery was like another nail in the coffin of the HOA's arrogance. The residents watched with wide eyes, their anger slowly turning into hope. For the first time in years, someone with real authority was standing up to the board. And then came the words nobody expected to hear. "This office is unsafe." Effective immediately, it shut down. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even cheers. Residents felt a wave of justice rush through them. The board members, once so powerful, sat frozen in shock. Their empire control had just crumbled with a single sentence. The office that symbolized their authority was no longer theirs to command. And all because they ignored the one thing they should have never ignored: safety. But this wasn't just about shutting down an office. It was about something deeper. It was about a community finally being heard, about residents realizing that their voices mattered, even when the board tried to silence them, about accountability finally being enforced, and about the truth that no one, not even an HOA, is above the law. The fire marshal didn't just walk out quietly. He left behind a list of demands, written in bold ink, impossible to ignore. Fix the wiring. Install proper alarms. Clear out the hazards. Create an evacuation plan. And until every single item was checked off, the office doors would remain locked. No meetings. No decisions. No power. The residents left that day with mixed emotions. Relief, because the danger had been exposed. Joy, because justice had finally arrived. But also determination. They knew this was only the beginning. The board would try to regain control. They would try to paint themselves as victims. But the residents had seen the truth. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. What happened that day became the talk of the entire neighborhood. Kids whispered about the shut-down office. Parents told the story with pride. Elderly residents smiled for the first time in months. People felt united in a way they hadn't before. The HOA had tried to divide them, but the fire marshal's words had brought them together. Together against neglect. Together for safety. Together for a better future. And here's the powerful lesson hidden inside this story. Sometimes, standing up feels terrifying. Sometimes, speaking out makes you feel small. But one voice, one brave call, can change everything. That single resident who picked up the phone set off a chain of events that shook the foundation of an entire HOA. Courage is contagious. And once it spreads, there's no stopping it. The board members learned the hardest lesson of their lives. That no title, no office, and no position gives you the right to put others in danger. That arrogance will eventually collapse under the weight of truth. That leadership means responsibility, not control. And when you forget that, consequences will find you. The fire marshal became a quiet hero in that community. He didn't shout. He didn't seek attention. He simply did his job with integrity. But to the residents, he was more than just an official. He was a symbol of hope, proof that the system can work when people refuse to stay silent. His words, "This office is shut down," became a rallying cry for accountability. And so, the story of that day spread beyond the neighborhood. Other communities heard about it. Other residents found courage in it. It became a reminder that no matter how small you feel, your voice matters, that laws exist to protect you, and that sometimes the fight for safety is the fight that unites everyone. This was only the beginning of the battle. The board still had tricks up their sleeves. They still had influence. They still believed they could claw their way back. But the residents were no longer afraid. The office was shut down, yes, but more importantly, the power had shifted. And once power shifted people, it never fully goes back. So, here's the question for you. If you saw something wrong in your community, would you speak up? Would you take the risk, make the call, and stand firm? Because this story proves that one voice can be louder than 1,000 whispers. And sometimes, that one voice is all it takes to spark change. Backhand index pointing right, if you want to hear how the story continues and what shocking move the HOA tried to make next, stay tuned for Section 2. And if this story inspired you, make sure to share it, because you never know whose courage might be unlocked by hearing it. Is this conversation helpful so far? The HOA office was closed, but the story was far from over. For many residents, that day felt like a victory. But for the board members, it felt like a humiliation. And humiliated people often fight back harder than before. They weren't ready to accept defeat. They weren't ready to let go of the control they had held for so long. In the days after the shutdown, the neighborhood buzzed with conversations. Some people laughed about the office being locked. Others shook their heads, still in disbelief. Children rode past the building on their bikes, pointing and giggling at the big red "Closed by Fire Marshal" notice on the door. For the first time in a long time, the residents felt hope, but the board members were plotting their next move. Behind closed doors, the board began spreading rumors. They told anyone who would listen that the fire marshal had been overly harsh. They whispered that the resident who made the call was a troublemaker. They tried to twist the story, painting themselves as victims of a witch hunt. But the truth was too strong to hide. Everyone had seen the unsafe conditions. Everyone knew the fire marshal was right. Lies couldn't erase what had been exposed. Still, the board didn't stop. They sent emails filled with excuses. They blamed contractors. They blamed previous management. They even blamed residents for exaggerating complaints. But every word they wrote only made them look weaker. Because when trust is broken, no excuse can glue it back together. Meanwhile, the residents felt something powerful growing among them. Unity. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other before were now sharing stories, sharing coffee, and sharing courage. They realized they had been fighting the same battle all along, just in silence. Now, their voices were rising together. And when people unite, fear begins to fade. One resident said it best at a community gathering. They shut us down for years with their rules. Now, the fire marshal shut them down for ignoring the rules that really matter. That line spread like wildfire, becoming a chant of strength. The board tried one last desperate move. They announced a special meeting at a local hall, claiming they would address the community. Flyers were shoved into mailboxes. Emails were blasted out. But instead of curiosity, the announcement sparked anger. People remembered the years of fines, the ignored complaints, the arrogance. They weren't fooled anymore. When the meeting finally happened, the room was packed. The board sat at the front, trying to look confident, but their voices trembled as they spoke. They promised to improve safety. They promised to do better. They even tried to guilt the residents, saying the shutdown hurt the whole community. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Every excuse was met with crossed arms and cold stares. The board's words had lost all power. And then a resident stood up. It was the same woman who had called the fire marshal. Her voice was steady, her eyes firm. She said, "We trusted you to keep us safe. You failed. We warned you, and you ignored us. We won't be silent anymore." The room erupted in applause. The board couldn't hide their shame. Their control had finally slipped through their fingers. The weeks that followed were filled with change. The fire marshal checked in regularly, making sure every demand was met. Electricians came in to fix the wiring. New alarms were installed. Exits were cleared. Slowly, the office began to transform from a hazard into a safe place. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the building. It was in the people. The residents realized they had power. Real power. Not the kind written in bylaws or stamped on paper, but the kind that comes from unity, courage, and truth. They had faced down an arrogant board. They had stood up for safety. They had proved that no one is too small to make a difference. And that power could never be taken away from them again. The board members once feared were now just faces in the crowd. Some quietly resigned. Others tried to hold on, but with no office and no trust, they were powerless. The residents began to talk about new elections, new leaders, and new beginnings. It was a turning point, a chance to rebuild not just an office, but an entire community spirit. But here's the deeper lesson. This wasn't just about one office or one board. It was about accountability, about what happens when people in power forget their duty, about the courage it takes to stand up when everyone else is silent, and about the truth that real change often begins with a single, ordinary person who refuses to back down. Imagine if that one resident had stayed quiet. Imagine if she had thought, "It's not my problem." The unsafe wiring would still be there. The smoke detectors would still be broken. The danger would still be lurking, waiting for tragedy. But because she spoke, everything changed. Lives were protected. A community was awakened. And an entire board was forced to face consequences. That's the power of one voice. The power of truth. The power of refusing to accept excuses. And it's a power that lives in all of us. The story of this HOA spread far and wide. Other communities began to ask questions. Other residents found courage. Fire marshals in other towns were called. Board members everywhere were reminded that safety is not optional, and arrogance has consequences. This one story lit sparks that reached far beyond one neighborhood. And yet, the most powerful part of the story isn't the shutdown itself. It's what came after. The way people came together. The way fear turned into strength. The way silence turned into voices. That is the true victory. So, if you're listening to this, remember this. Your voice matters. Your safety matters. Your community matters. And no matter how big the challenge feels, change begins with action. Sometimes, all it takes is one phone call. The fire marshal may have shut down an unsafe office, but what really got shut down that day was arrogance, neglect, and control. What got open was courage, unity, and hope. And that is the legacy of the story. Backhand index pointing right. If the story moved you, don't just stop here. Share it with someone who needs courage today. Comment with your thoughts. And remember, every time you speak up, you might just be the voice that saves lives.